All right, so this is how to take apart the computer. So obviously the reverse, and this is a desktop computer, but obviously you're going to be doing the reverse when you put this back together. The case comes off by lifting the handle and lifting it up this way. Inside, you'll see several different components. One is the processor. The processor is underneath. This is a fan that spins to keep it cool. This is the hottest part of the computer. And underneath it are little cooling fins all the way around. And this does all the thinking for the computer. We're not going to take that off, but when you buy a computer at a store to assemble it yourself, you would choose your processor and you would install it by screwing in these screws. Underneath it, there's a lot of pins and things that can also require some special kind of a grease for heat. And since we don't have that here, we won't be taking that apart today. Next to the processor are the RAM modules. And by the way, before you begin touching anything, you need to discharge static electricity from your hands. You have thousands of volts of electricity that you build up when you walk around a room or whatever that are in your hands. And the electronics are very sensitive to them. So if you just simply touch something without putting your hand on bare metal on the computer case to ground it, you will discharge voltage into the components and possibly blow them out. So you'll notice when I'm working, I usually have a hand on something and I'm pushing down here. So once you've discharged, you probably don't need to bother holding on to the case, but I just do that anyway. If you're comfortable working with your hands on the case at the same time that you're moving things around, then do this, but just make sure that all you've done is you've discharged first before you begin touching things, okay? So here we go. To remove the RAM chips, you need to push them. Now notice these are in the white slots. There's a black lever and a white lever. We push down on both at the same time and it separates from the RAM chip. And RAM is the random access memory. This is where, if this were a brain, this is the part where it's just short-term memory. It's like I just said something to you and you're thinking about it. It's not the long-term memory. The long-term memory is in the hard drive, which is here. This is where information about all kinds of stuff, everything you've ever done in your life, everything the computer has ever needed to remember, programs, stuff like that are kept here. This is where working memory, math calculations and stuff processed through here, active things that are going on in the computer. So I'm going to go ahead and pull out that RAM chip now. The reverse, putting this back in, you'll notice this is an offset little notch in here. It's not in the center. And when you're putting this back in place, inside, you'll notice there's a little dark area here where it's solid, where this is going to line up. So you can't force it in the wrong way. You've got to be really careful and gentle when this goes back in. Make sure it's not turned the wrong way, all right? And notice also, these have to be down. They can't be up when you put them in. So we're going to have these in the down position to put this card back in place. And once it's in, you don't lift the levers up. You push down on the top of the card and notice what happens to the levers on either side. They snap right into place. All right, so that's how that comes in and goes out. There are 2 RAM chips on this computer. It's got a lot of memory, RAM memory. All right, so those come out like that. And you kind of have to fight with the wires a little bit here. Let's see, we'll take out the, this is a CD-ROM drive, but this is technology that isn't really used much anymore. Power cable, and then this is a drive cable. This sends information. This provides power. So you have to have both of those in order for this to work. To get the CD-ROM drive to come out, we're going to pull up on this and slide forward. Yeah, all right, somehow. I've forgotten the rest of how this comes out, but Oh, there is. Dang. All right, so someone's put a screw in here to prevent that from coming out. All right, well, this may or may not come out, but know that that's how, I'll probably leave this in. Just know that you're gonna have to hook up these wires in order for that to work. And there you'll notice there's a slot for this and a slot for that one. And make sure that when you're putting them in, notice there's a top side and a bottom side. They're different on either end, so there's only one way they can go in. In other words, this can't go in upside down. It's got to go like that. Same with the other one. All right, let's see if we can pull out. Oh yeah, so here's our hard drive. And again, power cable, information cable. Information cable, you can tell the difference because it's got a lot of wires, and all of this information runs together and feeds information to the processor over here. Let's see. And then this is one of the most essential parts. This is the power supply, and this is where all the electricity coming in from the wall. You'll notice this is in the back side here. This is where the plug goes in from the wall into the power supply unit. And this converts the electricity into a level of electricity that can go into the board. You can't just put 220 volts at, you know, a super high amperage into the board, all these electronics here, because they'll just burn up. It ramps down the voltage to 3.3 volts output. All right, so that's what the job of this is. A lot of times when a computer fails, it's because the power supply stopped working, because a capacitor might have exploded or something inside of it. So that's what that does. For that to come out, there are 3 screws here. And then, you know, what we might need to do is I'll leave this in, and then you could take those 3 screws out and pull this out. Now, when you pull it out, all right, it's actually maybe a little bit more complex than that. So I would probably say that will be another day. All right, so you probably don't want to take that out, because wires are underneath a metal clip here. They run through the board and they go over to this power block over on the side. They also run underneath another clip over here. So the routing of how these wires go through here is very important, and where they're clipped down is very important as well. But you'll notice that there are some connectors that go onto the motherboard. This is the motherboard, so everything's connected onto the motherboard here. The other thing I did not mention yet is other graphics cards and peripheral card devices. So I'm probably using the wrong terminology there, but on this side, let's see, there's is this a USB? Yeah, USB card slot. So this allows somebody to plug in a USB device into the computer and have it communicate. So like a mouse or a keyboard. To get these to come out, basically you're going to flip that up, and again I'm going to discharge, and then I'm going to pull that up and out. Okay, and you can see over on this side there's a little way to lift right here. I'm going to rock and lift, and then that card can come out just like that. All right, so same thing when you're putting this back in, it only goes in one way. It can't go this way. This needs to fit in, and when you're putting it in, it's a special way. Notice this is going to go beneath the motherboard. It's going to go on the edge of the motherboard. So when we put it in, we've got to reach over the edge of that board and not down onto the board, because if you scratch this board at all by marking it with this, you will ruin the electronics. Underneath, inside this board, it's green, but it's painted green over top of a lot of tiny little electrical traces. And the traces are basically just replacing what would be wires would be everywhere inside here if this were not using a circuit board. Circuit boards are basically ways to microscopically almost run electricity from one component to another, and then they paint over top of it with the green, so you don't really know what's going on underneath this board. But it's very, very, very complicated. It's like a little city, probably like a little state, with the amount of roads that you'd see going through like the state of Kentucky. There's probably just as many miles of little electrical traces running along underneath this board. So you have to be really, really careful with it. All right, so now this is designed to go into one specific slot, and you can see where that slot is when you're holding it over top of the different options here where it should go. Anyway, so this one belongs in the white slot. There are different size slots for different types of cards. This is known as an electronic card. All right, so I'm gonna see if we can slide this in. When you're putting it in, I'm holding it up as high as I can, sliding it through this slot, and then, like I say, that little tab is going right to the edge of this circuit board, not going into the circuit board, and then it's gonna line up so I can see it showing up here in the slot on the side. And then as I'm putting it down in, I'm making sure that the gold strip here at the bottom is sliding right into that slot. And you have to kind of work with it a little bit to make sure it's going in the right way. And once you've got it lined up, then you're ready to just rock it gently back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. These are not necessary. These are just blanks. They're holders to keep the placeholders for if you were going to put in another card. I like to keep them in there, but you may find that you're going to be struggling with them a bit because they want to move around. But that's how they should go in. You should feel like they're lined up. You can see this little loop goes right around that pin, that little hole, and lines right up with it, and it's pushed all the way down flat. Now I'm going to take this card, rock it back and forth gently until there it goes. You can almost hear it pop into place. And then I'm going to look at the bottom and make sure there's no gold showing along here where it's plugged into that slot. Now that that's all done, I'm going to make sure these are all back in place. And that one seems to have popped up. I'm going to wiggle it around and make sure it gets into the right place. And you can feel it once it goes in where it should. And I'm moving it at the bottom here with this finger to try to back and forth to try to find the place where it's going to go straight down into its little notch. And then you can see it doesn't want to move down. You don't want to force it. When it was up high like that, if I were forcing that, that would not work, and this would not close if it were not all the way in right. It's really important not to force anything when you're working with electronics. Okay, so this is ready to close. It snaps into place, and there should not be any force. You shouldn't have to force that. It should just go over nicely. If you're forcing it, check it again and make sure that you got everything in right. Okay, so that's done. I'm going to put the cards back in place. When you're putting these in, just be real careful that you're lining them up right. And again, make sure that they're not turned the wrong way. And again, I should have discharged my hand before picking up the card because these are extremely sensitive. Of all the components in this computer, these RAM chips are the most sensitive. And again, I'm pushing on both ends with my fingers on the top to snap these into place. Again, I'm gonna get this other white lever. To get there, I gotta get around these wires a little bit. So I have to kind of push back. Don't force anything, but I'm gonna ease myself in to this notch right here. And this will take a little bit of time. You might have to pull the wires back like that when you're doing that. That would be actually a good idea. And once that is laying in there nice and evenly and flat already, you can see it's not crooked. It's not crooked like this, it's flat. Then you can begin pushing down and snapping it into place. That's all done. And finally, we're gonna put our hard drive back in. Remember what I said about the cables. So I'm going to plug this cable, and you can see when you're putting these in, by the way, there's like an L-shaped notch right there. You see how this little piece comes down on that side, and on this one, this little strip of plastic comes down again right there on the end. That's how you know where those connectors go, because the connectors are the same way. There's only one way they can fit. All right, so I can see that this one's going to go on like this. I think. Maybe I'm looking at it wrong though. Oh, that's right. There we go. And one more. Just like that. And again, I'm looking, I see the little notch here. I'm gonna line that up with the little notch there. And ease it in. Just like that. And you can tell when it snaps into place, everything feels solid now. I'll pull the wires back out of the way. You can use either one of these, by the way. Both of these connectors will work here. So if I had chosen, I could have plugged this one in instead of the one I just plugged in here. The reason why there's two of those is sometimes you have two hard drives, which gives it, of course, a lot more storage space. And when this goes in, I'm going to put these two tabs so they fit underneath, just like that. They have to go underneath this metal strip right here, just like that. And then it just simply goes down into place, just like that. All right, so this is the release, and that's locked. All done. All right, we don't have to put this back, but we do need to remember to put the cables on. What would happen if you tried to start this without this hooked up? It would say CD-ROM is not present, because it doesn't know that it's there, because it can't detect it. It doesn't have power going to it, and it can't tell from the information sent back to the motherboard and the processor, because the information cable is not hooked up. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this lined up. So there's the notch on this side, and the notch again is on that right side. So I'm going to line that up with that notch. And finally, we've got our information cable. And usually, if these are really hard to flip over this way. So the way that they're positioned already generally is how they have to go back on if the computer is already just being taken apart and put back together. So I'm going to snap that back in, and we are all set to go. Finally, the case goes on like this. You can see these tabs, they fit into these little tab slots, and lay it down. And then we're going to lift this up and going to tap that down nicely. You shouldn't have to force it too much, but it does need a little bit of encouragement sometimes to go on. And this is probably the hardest part of it all. You'll figure it out. Hopefully this helps you, and let me know if you have any questions. Thank you. Bye.